Video game fanatics have been yearning for a truly good Resident Evil film adaptation for years. Ever since the first film adaptation starring Milla Jovovich came out in 2002, fans have been mumbling under their breath while calling that entire franchise dumpster fire. Curiously enough, though, I'm a rare breed of humans that both like the video games and that original franchise, which I often consider a guilty pleasure series. I even bought it on Blu-ray years ago. Yet, like everybody else, a part of me still wanted to see them make a Resident Evil film that leaned much more heavily into the horror genre. And if nothing else, that's exactly what Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City does. Once the booming home of pharmaceutical giant Umbrella Corporation, Raccoon City is now a dying Midwestern town. The company's exodus left the city a wasteland with great evil brewing below the surface. When that evil is unleashed, the townspeople are forever changed, and a small group of survivors must work together to uncover the truth behind Umbrella and make it through the night. Whether or not you fell in love with the video games, I think most film fans can appreciate the much more deserving approach that this film takes as a horror flick. There's some really spooky moments here and there that I honestly thought made zombies scary again after years of zombies just being the background characters of an action film, or heck, the butt of a joke. They're not even scary in The Walking Dead anymore. They need humans to be the monsters in that. To see the undead be an actual threat again is a nice change of pace. There are definitely a few moments here and there where our group of survivors are surrounded by zombies, and everywhere they turn, another zombie pops up in a very dark and claustrophobic fashion, not unlike the first game, which I remember playing as a kid. Now, if you did play the games, specifically the first one, you'll immediately recognize the iconic mansion, which they sort of played tribute to in the other series as well, but this one's more special because they used the actual blueprints of the games to recreate it in real life. By doing that, they were also able to recreate a few iconic shots of that first game as well. And I'll tell you what, there's not a lot that scares me anymore, but I will always think back to a few things that did throughout my life. And one of them was the hallway scene of that first Resident Evil game, and they replicated that to a T in this movie, and that was so satisfying to watch. I, however, never played the second game, so the stuff at the police station, which I also understand was replicated, didn't affect me whatsoever. Maybe it will for you if you played those games. So the setting and the atmosphere of this film is spot on, as was the general idea that they used the characters of the games. That doesn't mean that they match the video game characters at all, but it is cool that they used them in general. But to tell you the truth, I had some issues with the film, specifically when it came down to some technical aspects. First of all, narratively, I didn't really understand some of the actions taken here. A lot of the whys were lost on me as to why Claire was there in the first place. If I had to guess, it had something to do with getting Chris out of the city because of some conspiracy theories that she's been hearing about the town. That is fine, but I also didn't really understand why everybody ended up at the mansion in the first place. It's very cool to see the mansion and everything that happens inside, but the build-up to get there was a little bit lost on me. Another complaint that I have about the film is just the mere fact that a lot of the characters blend in together. When you watch a lot of team-up films, you're usually aware of what role everybody plays and how they individually contribute to what's going on. In Resident Evil, I noticed that we have a lot of characters that seem to be doing the same thing, more or less. Nobody seems to have a special skill set or ability or disability. None of them stand out in any way, shape, or form. The problem with that is it doesn't really allow you to pick a favorite character. In fact, the only thing that it does is make it easier not to care when somebody dies. I couldn't care less if they got the characters right based off the games or not. I just want a good collection of diverse characters that stand on their own two legs. And I don't really think that we got that here. The only person that really stood out here was Leon Kennedy for being a little wuss. He sort of grows on you, but, not a ton. Finally, the only other issue that I have with this film is maybe the visuals. The look of certain creatures does not always look as good as they did in the other franchise. And after so many years, they should have looked exponentially better. Well, funny enough, that didn't really bother me as much because this film did remind me of the first video game, for which I have a ton of nostalgia with. Now that first game, likewise, did not have the best graphics in the world, so it wasn't the end of the world for me. But I could definitely see people complaining about it anyway. Now here's a random takeaway. A lot of this movie might remind you of another horror video game adaptation, Silent Hill. There's a few moments in the film that utilize things like ash, certain vehicles, and just the ambiance all around that seems to be taking some cues from Silent Hill. Now, I often think the two video game worlds are already similar as is, so again, it's not the end of the world, it's an interesting takeaway. So let's talk about my final score for a second. Starting with my unbiased score. The biggest issue that this film runs into is just the fact that a lot of the technical aspects aren't as good as they could have been, especially with the narrative. As I understand it, they crammed 2 storylines from the first 2 games into one, when really they should have just focused on the first game and left it at that. Unfortunately, that also means that it affects the unbiased score rather low because of it. So the lack of individual importance from the characters and confusing plot lines knocked this score down to 62%. As for how I personally felt about the film, or my bias score, I'll be honest, I actually had fun with the movie. I thought that the ambiance of the horror worked really well. The recreation of the mansion was a breath of fresh air and nostalgia. The claustrophobic moments where zombies come from every corner of the house was thrilling. It may not be the best story with the best graphics, but I did have fun with the movie, so my bias score is actually 88%, meaning that when we combine the 2 scores together, we come to the final rating of 75%, 75 out of 100 possible stars. So when it comes down to looking at this movie when compared to the rest of the Mila movies, I feel like it kind of blends in more than I ever thought it would be. I think in general, it's probably a better movie than the Mila movies, but the Mila movies will always be kind of a guilty pleasure series for me, so I rated those higher than I probably should have. So at the end of the day, they kind of blend in together for me, and it's hard for me to say if this actually is the movie that you should be watching, even though it probably is better. As weird as that sounds. I don't know, guys. Why don't you tell me what you thought about Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City in the comment section down below if you've seen it. And as for YouTube, you guys know what to do. Hit that like, subscribe button, and bell to be notified when I come out with my next review. And until then, peace out.
Dave examines movies we just watch for fun. Davey is the expert. He is the #1 critic that I go to when I need